On that golden Sunday afternoon, the entire house seemed to exhale in slow, honeyed breaths. Emma moved gracefully through the sunlit kitchen, the soft fabric of her pale silk blouse hugging her delicate curves, her long chestnut hair catching the light as she tucked a strand behind her ear. Her slender fingers traced along the countertop absent-mindedly, the faint scent of jasmine from her perfume lingering in the air. Her husband was away for the weekend on a spontaneous fishing trip, leaving the house unusually silent, yet charged with an almost electric anticipation. Upstairs, Ethan's music pulsed faintly through the walls, the sound of a young man retreating into his own world. Emma smiled softly to herself. She had always found Ethan to be a fascinating mix of quiet intensity and unspoken longing. At 22, Ethan was no longer the awkward teenager she had first met. He had grown into himself, tall, lean, thoughtful, but there was still a vulnerability that flickered in his gaze when their paths crossed. Emma had always felt a quiet pull toward him, a maternal instinct perhaps, or maybe something more delicate, more unnameable, something she was too careful to explore. As she moved to the window, the sunlight traced along her slender neck and rested on the gentle curve of her hips. She wrapped her arms loosely around herself, feeling the silky smoothness of her own skin beneath the thin fabric. Her heart fluttered unexpectedly, a restless energy humming just below the surface, pulling her mind in directions she tried not to follow. The house was still, but Emma could feel the undercurrent of something shifting, something waiting. She hesitated, one bare foot stepping onto the cool hardwood floor, her breath catching as she cast a glance toward the staircase. Did she dare check on Ethan? A simple gesture, she told herself. Just a motherly instinct. Yet as she placed one delicate hand on the banister, she couldn't shake the rush of adrenaline that coursed through her, a feeling that whispered this afternoon might not unfold the way she expected. Emma's bare feet moved soundlessly up the staircase, the soft rustle of her silk dress brushing against her thighs with every careful step. Her delicate fingers glided along the wooden railing, cool to the touch, sending a faint shiver up her spine. She paused for a moment halfway up, her heart fluttering inside her chest. A light, delicate pounding she hadn't expected. From behind the closed door of Ethan's room, she could hear the faint thump of bass and the soft murmur of his voice. She knew she should probably leave him be. After all, young men needed their space, their solitude. But something about the quiet, about the way the afternoon sunlight poured across the landing, pulled her forward. She smoothed a hand down her side, feeling the soft curve of her waist, the warmth of her skin beneath the thin fabric. Her hair, long and slightly tousled, fell in waves over her shoulder, brushing the side of her neck as she tilted her head thoughtfully. She brought a hand up, lightly touching her lips, as if debating with herself whether to knock or walk away. Then, without fully deciding, she let her hand drift to the doorknob, and slowly, gently, she eased the door just slightly open. The air inside was warm, heavy with the faint scent of cologne and something else. Something boyish, intimate. Through the small crack, Emma's eyes adjusted to the dim light, her breath catching softly as the sight inside came into focus. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, head bent, one hand braced on his knee. His other hand moved with deliberate intent, his brow furrowed in concentration. Emma's pulse quickened, her lips parting slightly in a soft, involuntary gasp. She knew immediately that she shouldn't be here, shouldn't be looking. Yet she couldn't move. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her fingers gripped the doorframe, knuckles white, as a rush of warmth spread across her chest. She took in the shape of Ethan's bare shoulders, the graceful line of his neck, the subtle curve of muscle along his arm as it tensed. She saw the vulnerability in his posture, the way he was so consumed in his own world, so unaware of anyone's presence. For a brief, breathless moment, Emma felt suspended in time, caught between stepping away and stepping further in, between motherly concern and something far more dangerous. Suddenly, as if sensing the shift in the air, Ethan's head lifted. Their eyes met. A jolt, sharp and undeniable, passed between them. His face flushed instantly, his mouth parting in surprise. Emma's own breath hitched, her hands trembling as she instinctively took a small step back. But neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. It was a moment stretched thin, delicate as silk and just as fragile. A moment filled with a tension so thick, so electric, it was impossible to ignore. And in that fragile silence, Emma felt something within herself shift, something she couldn't yet name, but knew deep down this afternoon had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated. That evening, the house was cloaked in a hush so delicate that even the creak of the floorboards under Emma's bare feet felt intimate. She drifted into the softly lit kitchen, the silk of her dress whispering across her thighs as she moved. Her long hair, slightly wavy, framed her delicate face, brushing against the smooth skin of her shoulders. She leaned lightly against the counter, her slender fingers tracing the rim of a porcelain teacup as she tried to steady her breath. Suddenly, she heard the gentle tap of footsteps. Turning, she saw Ethan standing at the edge of the room, his tall frame slightly hunched, his tousled dark hair casting faint shadows over his eyes. "Would you like some tea?" he asked quietly, his voice laced with a vulnerability that made her chest tighten. Emma offered a soft, inviting smile, her lips curving with natural grace. "That would be lovely," she murmured, her voice warm, almost like a caress. She watched as Ethan moved across the kitchen, his every motion careful, as though he were trying to mask the nervous energy pulsing beneath his skin. The kettle whistled softly, and he poured the hot water with a precision that betrayed his restless thoughts. Emma stepped closer, the faint scent of her jasmine perfume lingering in the air between them, delicate and intoxicating. She noticed the way his eyes darted toward her, a glance quickly stolen, then quickly hidden, and her heart beat a little faster. As they settled opposite each other, the air was thick with unspoken words. Emma wrapped her slender fingers around the warm mug, feeling the heat seep into her palms, grounding her as she studied the young man before her. Ethan took a deep breath, his Adam's apple bobbing slightly as he swallowed. "I've been thinking," he began softly, his voice just above a whisper. His eyes, deep and searching, locked onto hers. "About what you said earlier, about how I don't need to meet anyone's expectations but my own." Emma's breath caught, her chest rising slightly beneath the smooth curve of her dress. She tilted her head, letting a soft lock of hair fall across her cheek. "And what have you been thinking, Ethan?" she asked, her voice tender, coaxing. He hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously against the mug. "I don't know who I am without all of that," he admitted, his tone raw, exposed. "I've spent so long trying to be what everyone else wanted. I'm scared of what's left if I stop." A sharp ache bloomed in Emma's chest, a mix of sympathy and something deeper, more stirring. She reached across the table, her slender hand resting lightly on his. The touch was soft, barely there, but it sent a tremor through both of them. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice laced with a sweetness that wrapped around his name like silk. "You are already enough. You don't need to prove yourself. Not to me. Not to anyone." His eyes shimmered with a sudden intensity, and the room seemed to shrink around them, drawing them into a fragile, breathless space where the only thing that mattered was this moment, and the quiet, unexpected confession that had shifted everything between them. The moment stretched between them like a delicate thread, taut and trembling. Emma's slender fingers still rested lightly atop Ethan's hand, the warmth of his skin seeping slowly into hers. She could feel the soft tremble beneath his fingertips, the faint tension of someone holding back emotions too long restrained. Her chest rose gently with each breath, the smooth neckline of her silk dress revealing the graceful curve of her collarbone, the faint shimmer of her skin catching the dim light like porcelain kissed by candlelight. A soft flush crept up her neck as she realized how close they had drawn, how the world outside had fallen away, leaving just this fragile space between them. Ethan's gaze lifted, hesitant but magnetic, his eyes locking onto hers with a depth that made her pulse skip. His jaw tightened slightly as if searching for words, but none came. Instead, the silence grew thick, charged with something unspoken but impossible to ignore. Emma's lips parted slightly, drawing in a careful breath, her heart racing as a faint heat bloomed across her chest. She knew she should pull back, withdraw her hand, break the moment before it slipped too far. But she didn't. She remained still, held by the rawness of his stare, by the trembling vulnerability that called to something deep within her. And then, it happened. Ethan shifted, almost imperceptibly, his fingers grazing against hers. A touch so slight it could have been accidental, yet it sent a shiver racing up her arm, igniting a delicate tremor that fluttered through her whole body. His thumb brushed gently along the back of her hand, a tender, questioning stroke that lingered just a beat too long. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her lashes lowering slightly as a swirl of confusion and longing washed through her. She could feel the rapid beat of her heart beneath the smooth fabric of her dress, the faint quiver of her shoulders as she fought to steady herself. She hadn't anticipated this, hadn't prepared for the sheer intensity of the moment, the way her body responded before her mind could catch up. "You've always been there for me," Ethan murmured softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even when I didn't know how to ask for help. You were just there." Emma's fingers tightened slightly around his, her thumb instinctively tracing a delicate line along his wrist. Her voice trembled as she answered, "You never needed to ask, Ethan. I've always cared." The room felt impossibly small now, the walls pressing inward, the air charged with a breathless anticipation. Emma could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, the closeness that blurred the line between comfort and something far more dangerous. And for just a heartbeat, one sharp, exquisite heartbeat, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. They simply existed in the space between, caught in a moment so fragile, so charged. It was as if the entire world had gone still, holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. Emma drew in a shaky breath, feeling the press of Ethan's warmth through the delicate point where their hands touched. Her slender fingers, soft and cool, trembled slightly as they rested against his. She became hyper-aware of the graceful curve of her own body, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the smooth line of her throat as she swallowed, the faint shimmer of her skin under the dim light that wrapped the room in a haze of gold. Her heart thudded wildly, yet her mind sharpened in that instant. She knew without question they stood at the edge of a line that, if crossed, would unravel everything. Her voice came out in a whisper, sweet but firm. "Ethan," she murmured, pulling back just slightly, enough for a breath of space to slip between them. "You don't have to be anyone else. You're already more than enough, just as you are." Ethan's eyes flickered, his chest tightening as he absorbed her words. His jaw clenched faintly, and his fingers twitched as if reluctant to let go. His face, so young, so vulnerable, looked up at her with a softness that made Emma's chest ache. She drew in another breath, her shoulders pulling back just slightly, the thin silk of her dress shifting along the curve of her body as she steadied herself. Her long hair slid like a ribbon down her back, framing her delicate face as she offered him a small, gentle smile. "We have to be careful," she said softly, her voice wrapped in tender restraint. "Some things, some feelings, they can't be rushed." For a long moment, Ethan remained silent, his gaze searching her face, as if memorizing every detail. The delicate arch of her brows, the soft flush on her cheeks, the graceful curve of her lips that trembled faintly with emotion. Finally, with a heavy exhale, he nodded. "I know," he said, his voice barely audible. I don't want to lose this. Whatever this is." Emma's heart clenched. She reached out, just once more, to brush a soft touch against his hand. The briefest caress, lingering only a second before she let go completely. "You won't lose anything, Ethan," she promised gently, her voice like silk slipping through the air. "But we both need to remember who we are and where we stand." The weight in the room shifted, the air lightening just enough for both of them to breathe. Ethan offered a faint, grateful smile, and Emma mirrored it. A delicate, understanding expression that held just the right trace of sadness, just the right amount of hope. As she rose, the gentle sway of her hips carried her across the room, the soft glow of the lamp catching along the smooth line of her arms, the graceful curve of her back as she paused at the door. She turned, just once, to meet Ethan's eyes one last time. "Good night, Ethan," she said, her voice tender but unwavering. And with that, she slipped out, leaving behind a room heavy with unspoken words, with hearts racing quietly in the dark, and with the fragile knowledge that they had held the line, for now. The night wrapped the house in a velvety hush, the kind of silence so deep it seemed to press against the skin. Emma lay in bed, her silk nightgown clinging softly to the delicate curves of her body, the thin strap slipping slightly off her smooth shoulder as she shifted restlessly beneath the covers. Her long hair spilled across the pillow, a cascade of softness that framed her thoughtful, slightly parted lips. She stared up at the ceiling, heart still pounding, her chest rising and falling in a slow, unsteady rhythm. No matter how she turned or how tightly she wrapped the sheets around herself, she could not push away the lingering memory of Ethan's eyes, the quiet desperation behind his smile, the way his touch had left a faint, electric trace on her skin. She squeezed her eyes shut, drawing in a trembling breath. "This is just a phase," she whispered to herself. though even as the words passed her lips, they rang hollow. There was something shifting between them, something neither of them had dared name, but it pulsed in every glance, every hushed moment, every heartbeat that seemed to echo too loudly when they were near each other. Unable to stay still, Emma rose quietly, the silk fabric of her gown whispering along her thighs as she padded barefoot down the hall. She paused at her bedroom door, one hand lightly brushing the curve of her neck, feeling the heat still lingering there. The moonlight poured through the upstairs window, casting soft silver shadows that danced across the walls, wrapping the house in a glow that was both haunting and breathtaking. At the far end of the hallway, she could see the faint crack of light under Ethan's door. Her breath hitched slightly. She knew she should turn away, retreat back to her room, close the door and lock away these feelings before they took root too deeply. But her feet stayed planted, her heart pounding a quiet drumbeat of defiance. Down the hall, Ethan stirred, his silhouette briefly crossing the glow from his lamp. She imagined his restless pacing, the same turmoil churning inside him that now coursed through her veins. She could almost feel the weight of his thoughts, the way he was grappling with everything they had left unspoken. Emma pressed a hand lightly to the wall beside her, feeling the coolness seep into her skin, grounding her. She knew the path ahead would not be simple. Not for her, not for Ethan, not for the fragile, unsteady bond between them. But she also knew something with a terrifying clarity. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. As she turned back toward her room, her silk gown sweeping softly behind her, she let her fingers trail briefly along the banister. Her lips curved into the faintest, most bittersweet smile. Somewhere deep inside, a storm was gathering, and Emma knew, whatever came next, neither of them would escape untouched.